Well, hello and welcome to another amazing guest interview here on the Profit with Law podcast. I'm your host, Moshe Amsel, and I'm excited for my conversation today because we have lots of marketing people who come here on the show, and the conversation kind of gets monotonous, right? It's like, what should we be investing in, and where should we put our money first, and is SEO the right thing? Is PPC the right thing? Our conversation today is going to help you understand where marketing is going, where the world is going. We're going to talk about Google and what they're telling you to do, and talk about some new concepts that you might want to think about, which might mean that you need to change directions every once in a while. So I'm excited to jump into this conversation and really get that groundwork laid for you so that you can be at the top of your game when it comes to the marketing of your law firm. Our guest today is Tanner Jones. Tanner is the Vice President of Business Development for Consultwebs, also hosts the LAWsome Podcast, which I was not familiar with until today, but I am an avid podcast listener. I will be checking the show out. My team will link that show up for you in the show notes. You can also search for LAWsome, LAWsome, in your podcast player and check it out. We love to give podcast hosts love when they come here on the show. So definitely give a listen. If it's for you, subscribe to his show. Let me see. I'm going to read you my official intro, but you know how it works. We're going to get Tanner on here in just a moment to tell us a little bit about himself. Tanner joined Consultwebs over a decade ago with a mission to support Consultwebs' long history of helping law firms grow their business through the internet. Now, having consulted thousands of attorneys, he is Consultwebs' Vice President of Business Development and host of the popular legal marketing and management podcast, LAWsome. Tanner, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Moshe. Very happy to be here.
And I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to come and talk to our listeners. We have people who are out for a run, in the shower, making kids breakfast. Who knows what they're doing while they're listening? But there's one thing in common between all of them, and that is they're law firm owners, managers, key personnel. They're listening to the show for one reason, and that is that they want to increase profitability of their firm, and marketing is a key component of that. So I'm excited to jump into the conversation. But before we do that, there are people who are scratching their heads saying, who's this guy, Tanner Jones? Never heard of him. So tell us a little bit about yourself. How in the world did you get involved with the legal industry? What makes you an authority to talk about legal marketing today?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, the best way to learn is to get in it, to do it. I've been working with lawyers now going on 14 years, 2023 today, and so it's been quite some time, since I started. Before then, I was in the insurance business. I was in human relations and human management and resources with a college. And then I finally got into being introduced to Consultwebs at the time. At that time, I had very little digital marketing experience, but came into with them when they were relatively small, working with a handful of law firms across the country. And they had always been focused on lawyers. So it was a very niche business in the digital marketing arena. And at that time, there were still a lot of law firms leaning on traditional advertising, television, yellow pages, more static style advertising and marketing. And so it was a real learning experience, and learning a fragmented industry, where there are a lot of opportunities everywhere you look, and trying to decide heads or tails, what's working, what's not. But I've learned just through the School of Hard Knocks. It's been a process. We've since now grown to over 130 people. As a company, we have over 130 clients across the country, all of which aggressively investing to grow their law firms, to grow their profits, and to ultimately make a big impact in their community and serve more clients. And that's really what gets us up in the morning.
Awesome. I love that. And I want to jump right into the conversation. So something very interesting that you shared with me is this idea of agile marketing. Can you set the stage for us? What is, because agile has been used in management style and understanding Agile and Scrum go together and that kind of stuff. Can you lay the groundwork for what does Agile marketing mean and what does that mean for our law firm owners today?
Sure. Yeah, Moshe, just as you referenced, I mean, this is not a new term by any means. And in fact, it was really born out of industry and really trying to build workflows and operations. And just as you've said, there are a number of terms related to this, but just to boil it down, the concept is very simple. From a marketing standpoint, most firms are investing in a lot of different places online, whether it be their search engine optimization with their website. They may even have a vendor that they're working with as a conversion rate optimization specialist, independently contracted. But then there are paid advertising platforms, social media, and many other platforms in between. And the challenge for a lot of law firms is that they'll start with this expenditure, they'll agree to a certain budget with this particular campaign, and then this budget for this campaign and this budget, and they all combine to be a pretty significant investment being applied to digital marketing. The challenge, though, is that in many instances, when you're working with so many different groups, there is inconsistency in reporting. There's inconsistency in how these groups define success or measure success, and then a lot of communication differences between them all. And the problem then is that a law firm very rarely has a good understanding as to what's truly performing because there's no true apples to apples comparisons. And because of that, there's naturally diluted budgets, or there's wasted spend, or worst case, there is lack of spend or lack of marketing and certain opportunities that are producing. So it boils down to the concept of, rather than just fragmenting your budget and not necessarily knowing where it's going at any given time or what it's producing, it's the concept of putting a universal accountability around that spend and knowing where dollars are being allocated between all of those platforms and diagnosing, are they producing the metrics that we've established as benchmarks as success? And if they're not, you're constantly reallocating dollars into the platforms that are producing at any given time. The truth of the matter is that marketing doesn't produce every single time. That's just the reality. There are certain months that perform better than others. There's certain messaging that performs better than others. And if you're not constantly testing and then measuring against what has worked previously and the certain benchmarks that you've established, then there's very little accountability into making progress with your marketing spend. And that's the concept of Agile, optimizing your marketing spend month after month.
Now, I love this concept, and it makes a lot of sense to me. And I know you ran through it pretty quick, so hopefully our listeners really picked up on it. But the first thing that I begin to question is, there are different marketing strategies have different time frames as far as how long it'll take for them to pay off, and when can you measure the success. For example, if I'm investing in SEO, we all know that it's going to take me somewhere between 6 to 18 months to really rank well in Google, and a good SEO marketer can get me there a little faster. Somebody not as good, maybe it take a little bit longer. Maybe I don't even get there, right? But we get close. We're on first page. We're just not at the top. How do you measure that in comparison to, say, your Google Ads campaign or a Facebook Ads campaign, where we're expecting that the dollars spent is going to turn into revenue dollars a lot faster?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. And I would challenge the marketer or the advertiser to look specifically at the individual platform and objectively evaluate what is the outcome we're looking for, because it all depends on the type of marketing that's being applied. So I'll step back just a moment because I think the context will be helpful, but you can envision this funnel. And most that have marketed for a while understand the concept of the marketing funnel, where the very top of the funnel is the widest part of the funnel. And naturally, that's where the bulk of leads go in when you're thinking about it from a marketing funnel. Where you can also envision that funnel and think about it from a marketing awareness standpoint. When you're marketing to people at the top of the funnel, these are to people who are not actively needing legal services from you. In most instances, the types of advertising would be like TV advertising, or branded advertising like billboards, radio. For digital, that can be YouTube. If you've produced some high quality videos and you're just wanting to run them in your community, that's great branding. You're not reaching everyone in the moment that they need legal services, but you're creating top of mind awareness. So that type of advertising dollar should not be tied back to signed cases. And all too often, we make a mistake as law firms or as marketers to look at that and say, I just spent $5,000 a month in YouTube for 3 months, and I see 0 conversions coming from YouTube. Well, the reality is that most people are not converting from YouTube. They're then going and searching for your brand. And so there are other metrics that you can monitor, brand searches being one of those, overall site traffic, direct site traffic. But you can also look at YouTube views for your view counts, overall engagement, or is the view through time? Are they watching through those videos? Those are the metrics that we establish benchmarks around, because that type of marketing should not be tied to cases. It should be tied to the metrics that it actually influences positively. Does that make sense, Moshe?
Yeah, it does. But then going back to your whole explanation at the beginning, so when we're dealing with agile marketing and we're trying to create this, I guess, comprehensive dashboard of figuring out, what's working, what's not working. Are we talking about the middle of the funnel? Are we where are we in that conversation?
Sure. Yeah, and that's a fantastic question, because it ultimately, if you can spend in the bottom of the funnel, those are direct cases. Those are people actively looking for lawyers. So the bottom of the funnel, you may ask, where is that from a marketing standpoint? Well, we see that most often as it can be search engine optimization, as you've already alluded to. If you're ranking for car accident lawyer in the local pack and someone clicks that, they're at the bottom of the funnel. They use lawyer in their search string, so they're naturally looking for you. So that's where we want to funnel the bulk of dollars. Ideally, 50, 60+% of dollars are being funneled into that because they're sales ready, they're activated. And you want to push as much money into that as long as it'll spend, right? Beyond that, you also want to support the top of the funnel, because if you're not creating awareness, very rarely are you feeding the future of your law firm and really the true value, which is top of mind awareness and knownness in your marketplace. And so what other spend is available, we want to attribute toward the top of the funnel and middle of the funnel road, which can lead into other search engine optimization efforts like longer tail type strategies of content. But the idea, again, just to summarize, is spend as much as you can to convert leads and cases immediately. The other dollars that are not spending should be allocated to support the brand, which then full circle will eventually support the sales activation efforts simultaneously.
Okay, so it almost seems like the branding dollars that are for those top of funnel items is more arbitrary than the bottom of funnel dollars, right? So the bottom funnel dollars, I can see how much it costs to acquire a customer, right? So I can know how much I'm willing to spend based on how much money a customer is worth to me. Mm-hmm. The top of funnel stuff, where it's kind of just, branding and creating that overall awareness of our business in the marketplace, doesn't have that correlation. So how does a business determine how much they should be spending there? I mean, is it this 60-40 split that you're articulating, and we look at the total business we're bringing in and we say, okay, we're willing to spend X amount on the bottom, and therefore we're willing to spend X amount on the top?
I did a presentation one time to a group of primarily personal injury lawyers around this concept, and the idea is that there are phases of growth. And the phase of growth that you're in, if you're in a startup phase, you are hustling. And many of you are listening and you're shaking your head. This is a hustling stage. And in most instances, you want to divert the majority of your dollars into getting leads and cases immediately. In most instances, you have to expect that you're going to pay a premium on those leads and cases because you have very little brand equity in the marketplace. So you will pay a higher premium cost per case wise because of that. As you grow, you create more streams of leads and revenue, and that positions you better. Ultimately, the more places you are, the more known you become in the marketplace. And what we find is you work through those 3 stages of growth all the way to a market dominator stage. When you reach the market dominator stage, you're actually flipping the percentage. You're putting more marketing dollars into brand equity because that is the power of it. It's feeding everything else. In the early stages, you're putting the bulk of dollars in the sales activation stages. But I'll say this too, Moshe, what I've found is that those firms that are investing aggressively in the market dominator category of growth, where they're dumping the majority of marketing dollars into brand, they actually pay a lower cost per client acquisition in the sales activation efforts because of the equity of the brand that's influencing the click-through rates and then the conversion rates once they call in.
Yeah. So if I understood correctly, what you're saying is that if you don't have any branding in place, it's going to cost you more to get the leads or the clients that you're acquiring at the bottom of the funnel. Mm-hmm. If you have the branding in place, there's more awareness in the marketplace that you exist. It's going to be easier to convert those bottom of funnel leads. So those are going to be cheaper, but it's because you're spending money at the top as well.
That's right. That's right. And that leads into the big concept of Agile. If you're spending, let's say if you're spending $10,000 a month across multiple types of marketing, well, where it's eventually going to is you need to be calculating that overall cost per client acquisition based on the $10,000 investment, because it's all influencing the individual platforms on how they ultimately convert, how the lead converts, whether it's directly through the YouTube ad or them going to Google and searching your brand name, but then clicking your pay-per-click ad and you thinking it's all coming from pay-per-click, right?
Right. Yeah. The overall measurement's the easiest one, right? Like you look at your profit and loss statement and you can easily see what percentage of your revenue coming in is your marketing spend, right? Mm-hmm. It's when we start to look at what within that marketing spend is working versus not working. Where do we need to reassign those dollars? Like you put it so well at the beginning of our conversation. I think that's where things start to get challenging and people start to get confused. Another area that I think is a challenge for a lot of law firm owners is determining to spend that money in the first place. I think that there's a little bit of a misconception that when I'm ready, like when I have the money to spend, I'll increase my marketing spend. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that you need to increase your marketing spend in order to get to that revenue metric you're trying to achieve. It's backwards.
So you kind of need. I'll go to the gym once I lose some weight. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Once I start to be in shape, then I'll go and use weights because, I'll be able to. That's exactly what business owners are doing when it comes to marketing. And I work with my coaching clients on this aggressively because, like we create a plan on paper. And if you know that 10% of your revenue needs to be spent on marketing and your goal is $1 million in revenue this year, then you need to be spending $100,000 on marketing. Mm-hmm. And most firms, when they're targeting $1 million, they're probably spending between $2,000 and $5,000 a month on marketing, which is half of where they need to be, or less. So they need to increase that budget. But then the question is where do I put the money? And firms at that level don't have a CMO in place, right? They're kind of trying to figure this out. And all they have is, vendors speaking into their ears and, talking about how their, thing is the best thing since sliced bread. So I love this concept of agile marketing, but I'm wondering what do you think about where firm owners should be going to try to figure this out and try to get the right solution into place? I know they need to test, but what should they be testing?
Yeah, I mean that's such a challenging question because it's so open-ended across. In coaching law firms that every firm is different. They're starting with a bit of a different foundation. They have different things going, and so I'll try to speak universally. And in that, I think it first starts with taking an inventory of what you have in place already. Most lawyers out there have a website in place. And so I would first be curious to know, is it getting traction? Because that's a first indicator. Is there more juice to squeeze, right? If you have a well-built website and it's still in its infancy stage and you're on page 2 for a lot of the quality searches, well, there's a real opportunity to move into page 1, depending on the competitiveness of the market, maybe relatively quickly. And so that would be an inventory to look at. What do I have in place as an asset that can be leveraged? Or, am I maxing everything out already in terms of what's in front of me? I often say too that, I'm a marketer, digital marketer. That's my career. That's what I know. But I also understand that grassroots marketing is still a very, very effective thing. And so I challenge every lawyer out there to make sure that they are tapping into their own network first and foremost, and finding opportunities to reciprocate value. Look for those, create value for those in your network. That's the first place to start. From there, from a marketing standpoint, Moshe, I find that, firms are coming in with very different inventories of marketing. And so once you start with an assessment, Consultwebs, who I work with, and many other credible groups out there will start with an assessment. And if they're not, they're likely leaning on more of a set it and forget it model, or more of a cookie cutter model. Start with an assessment and get a sense of what's performing and what's not. If you have no idea what you paid to attract a case on average last year, that's the first place to start. You're going to build accountability in your business when you can begin to put benchmarks on, we need to achieve a cost per case of $1,500 or less. Once you start to put real numbers to it, now you elevate the accountability in the relationship if you're working with a vendor, or you allocate the accountability within your own office with your marketing director. And alignment is a good thing. Are you going to hit that metric every month? Probably not. And that's the reality of it. But I can guarantee you're going to come much closer over time if you're actually watching it and monitoring it. And so when it comes to the allocation of that, Moshe, it comes down to the expectation of, let's set benchmarks with each one of these efforts. With SEO last year, for example, here's the traffic, here are the average rankings that we had. We believe that we can create, get 100 more terms into average 10 rankings. I'm just throwing out some metrics there, but objective metrics that you can evaluate apples to apples comparatively the following year or the following quarter, and begin to establish whether they're trending up ahead of the benchmark, whether they're flat, or whether they're trailing down. When you're looking at it individually at those efforts with a universal budget, then you have the ability after 60 to 90 days, depending on what type of marketing strategy it is, you can begin to make educated decisions on pulling back from a spend or dumping more into it. If that cost per client acquisition, assuming that's the metric you want to monitor for that strategy, has achieved that metric or fallen below it. So I may be over talking there and trying to explain it, but the big concept is making sure that you're looking universally from a budgetary standpoint, but you're still applying time and effort on the individual platforms. Because as soon as you lose accountability on the individual platforms, you lose the true value of an agile marketing strategy.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing between the lines is that you really need to know what your KPI is to measure the success of each individual effort. In your example with SEO, for example, where you're ranking in top 10 for X number of keywords, if you're not measuring that, or you're not looking at that, then you might be looking at the wrong thing. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to this, is the big piece of advice basically understand what your goal is, understand what you're trying to achieve with this, and then measure that. It sounds to me like that's what you're saying.
I think that's the best way to put it. It's establishing a SMART goal tied to every marketing strategy that you're doing, and that forces you to think ahead. If this is successful, this is what it looks like. These are the metrics that we'll achieve. And keep in mind, again, these are not perfect. In some instances, you're starting with zero data. If you're just starting the strategy, this is best case scenario, and challenge the group that you're working with. Worst case scenario is here. Best case scenario is here. So let's agree that this is our benchmark, and we're going to continue to monitor it over 90 days. We're going to have a really good sense as to where we're trending against this benchmark and what decisions we need to make following that.
I think this is really important for you to have in your vendor relationship, regardless. Like, I've seen clients of mine where, they're just able to say, well, it feels like I'm not getting any results, but it doesn't. They don't know why they feel that way, or it's based off of client acquisition, but it's not based off of the specific individual things that they have going on with that marketing effort. I think that getting really clear on what those KPIs are and what's good and what's bad, and having those conversations with the vendor ongoing is really important. I want to switch gears here for a moment, because Tanner, in the green room, as short as it was when we spoke before we got started, you mentioned a Google report, something about the client journey. Can you talk to me about that Google report? You piqued my interest, and I was waiting for us to be recording behind the microphone. What were you referring to, and how does that impact what we're discussing right now?
Yeah. Back around, it would have been the pandemic era, probably summer of 2020, Google came out with a study, a pretty extensive study, where they were reviewing the consumer journey, basically evaluating how users begin the start a process of looking for services or products online, and what that process looks like. And the results of that study ultimately found that the amount of touch points that a business needs from a consumer before they make a buying or hiring decision is growing at a dramatic rate. So what that means is, as of today, Google suggests, well, this was actually back in the summer of 2020, Google is suggesting that an individual user would need at least 26 touch points of a brand before they felt comfortable enough to hire them or to purchase a product from them. So think about that. As a lawyer, and many transactional lawyers, and in fact, that's the first time you've ever dealt with that individual client. And in most instances, you probably have not been marketing to them, which illustrates why there's so much skepticism in the marketplace when someone is evaluating whether they're hiring a lawyer or hiring a dentist, a doctor, whatever it may be. There is a process of evaluation that a user does online. And again, today, it's suggested that now it's over 30 touch points that a consumer would need. So what are touch points? Touch points can be them seeing an advertisement on YouTube, or seeing an ad while they're watching a Hulu show at night. But it could also mean them simply scrolling past an ad on Facebook of your brand. Or it could be someone leaving a review about you on social media that another friend sees, and then searches, and then sees more reviews, and then clicks into your website and reads your about us or your bio page. That's another touch point. So again, what does this mean to lawyers who are considering, like, how does this impact me, and what do I need to be doing? Well, the idea with this study is that you need to be intentional about literally being everywhere. That's the concept. You want to be in as many places as possible as a brand, naturally, so that you are incrementally increasing the amount of touch points with your client base. And that sounds well and good, but the idea behind that is that you have to understand the consumer journey. And that's where Google got into, there's always going to be a trigger point. And that trigger point, let's say for a estate planning lawyer, it may be a family member has had a parent that has been deceased. And now that's the trigger event in their life. It's going to send them to the internet. They're going to start Googling about handling, their estate plan and all of these things. That's that trigger point. For a personal injury lawyer, it may be someone who's just been involved in a car accident. Now they're going online to research insurance questions. So once they move into that trigger, now it's this process of exploration and evaluation. In the exploration phase, in most instances, they're not looking for the individual solution or a service. They're really just exploring, what questions do I need to be asking? What information do I need to be collecting? That presents a real opportunity for law firms. You can reach people in this exploration phase and the mindset. And so really think about your clientele and what's keeping them up at night. when they're going through this exploration process, they haven't really gotten to that evaluation process yet. And so are there frequently asked questions you can deliver through email, through social, through blog posts, through video? Those are all great ways to really consider, how can I reach consumers during this phase? Then they move into the evaluation phase. And that's much more around social proof and credentials. Can you do what it is that they're trying to find a solution to? And you can illustrate that through testimonials, prior clients that are leaving quotes that are speaking explicitly to that particular need or that practice area type. Do you have prior awards or recognitions related to that practice area type or to that need? Case results. Those are all examples of ways to build social proof and ultimately encourage them when they're in that evaluation process. In many instances, most consumers are looking at 4, 5, 6+ lawyers in this evaluation process. But with those 26 touch points that Google referenced in that study, they are moving in a figure 8 through the exploration and evaluation. And as they're learning and consuming more information and making more connections in their own head, they're drilling down on the better or more relevant option for them. And so again, the big piece here with this study is that be intentional with your marketing strategies. If all you're doing is putting dollars in that sales activation phase, you are not building a future business, or at least you're not putting yourself in a position to really grow and scale your law firm.
It's very interesting, this whole concept. I mean, it used to be that, that we all heard at some point that, you need a minimum of 7 touch points to, to be able to make a sale. And those are the numbers thrown around. What was this number from Google? 26 in 2020. Yeah, 26 touch points. And, I would challenge anybody who's listening to this to look at your system or process you have in place from when somebody first contacts your law firm for the very first time. Let's just assume that's the first touch point. Do you have a system in place that's designed to give them 26 touch points along the way? Because my assumption is that for most of you, the answer is no. I know in my business, the answer is no. Mm-hmm. I don't, we don't have that right now. And as we're having this conversation, I'm thinking we can totally have it though. It's easy for us to create that. I mean, we just expand email sequences, expand retargeting ads, just create more opportunities for them to evolve into our content. Part of the benefit of having the podcast and the YouTube channel is that when somebody comes into our world, sometimes they're coming in having already had a dozen touch points because they listened to a bunch of episodes, right? So I think that we do have a leg up because we're creating content that's consumable. Yep. And perhaps that's part of the answer to the equation. Or you have a billboard and somebody's passed that billboard 26 times before they're reaching out to you, right? So you already have a number of touch points, but you didn't have all those touch points at the right phases either. So, really being intentional with addressing those questions that they're going to have during this consumer decision-making journey, I think would be really smart. So so much of our time is spent figuring out how do we get leads in the door. And this is something we talk about all the time, that, firms do a poor job of managing that lead to sale, that process, and having a good process in place to make sure you're converting as high as you can along the way. Your marketing dollars travel a lot further when your conversion rate goes up.
That's right.
So if you can rework your process of what happens from when they become a lead to be much more intentional with not only providing the touch points, but providing the right touch points to give them the social proof they need, to give them the examples of what it might look like to work with you and spell it out for them. So many people assume that if somebody stopped responding to me or they stopped, communicating with me, that they're not interested anymore. And the reality is that they can just be sitting on the sidelines, just observing and trying to figure out, which is the one. But if they keep getting emails from me and those emails are valuable and keep pointing to various reasons why they should work with me, chances are when they do finally decide to make a decision, who are they going to go with?
The one they know. That's it.
Yeah.
The one they remember. And that's gold. I mean, to that point, one of the very inexpensive way to nurture would be through email nurturing. When someone fills out a contact form or calls in, they're a new lead, putting automated sequencing in place for that, where you can set up a series of drip and educate and build value, but also showcase credentials and social proof. Very easy, very practical, but very effective way of doing just what we're talking about.
Now, is this what you call the messy middle?
So the messy middle is the whole challenge there with, in between that first touch, however they heard about you, all the way to that last touch, that last attributable source that they used when they picked up the phone and called, or when they came into the office. So that messy middle is largely the unknown. It's all in the metrics that we were talking about earlier when you're evaluating these individual platforms. As long as those platforms are reaching benchmarks and showcasing or illustrating trajectory upward, that is supporting the messy middle. And the messy middle, again, is that exploration and evaluation process. So the more you're intentionally feeding that process, yes, the more you are intentionally growing your practice and your knownness in the marketplace.
Okay, so Tanner, this has been a great conversation, and we really learned a lot today. I thought it was very insightful. I want to find that Google study. I want to read it because I'm a nerd like that. But for our listeners who have learned a bunch of new things today, perhaps they learned that there's KPIs we need to be monitoring that we haven't been monitoring. Perhaps they learned that we need to focus some of our marketing budget on the top of funnel branding items that are not going to turn into clients tomorrow. And perhaps that will also decrease our overall cost of bringing clients in on the where we're spending money on directly on client acquisition. Perhaps they learned that there's a lot more steps we need to implement in the lead to sales process to really get those client touch points ramped up so that they, we're the ones that they remember. There's so many pieces that we covered today, and I don't want our listeners to leave with a state of confusion. So can you lay out some sort of action plan for our listeners that, if this is the first time you're hearing any of these concepts, here's what you should do, step 1, 2, 3 from listening to this episode?
Sure. Yeah. I would start with taking an inventory check. So go out and solicit 3 to 5 analysis or assessments from marketing consultants. Ideally, start with Moshe. I know you have a lot of connections in the marketplace, but definitely start with someone you trust or someone who's done well in the market already. And go out and solicit those and get a sense of what they are seeing on their end. And that's going to help you just have more of an objective understanding of what your marketing looks like today. All too often, we'll have our own blind spots. That will help draw out, the good, bad, and the ugly. From there, I would encourage you to really start identifying what are the true KPIs that matter to our business. And that goes through the individual marketing strategies, but you should also have KPIs along the way. You and I have both kind of alluded to the intake aspect. So you should know what your conversion rate is or what that benchmark conversion rate is on the leads that come in your door. Most firms are signing leads from the web at 10%. So they need 100 leads in order to sign 10 clients. Now, that can skew up or down depending on your practice. But again, establish a KPI around it. And then that way you can confidently measure it going forward. If you need to evolve those measurements over time as you learn more, feel welcome to do that. And, it's your business. From there, then I would challenge most business owners to walk through that process that you also alluded to, which was identifying what are our goals. So we have our KPIs. What do we want to achieve? Big picture for the business. And then ultimately the marketing strategies in between should be dictated based on those KPIs and based on those measurable goals that you're trying to achieve. By working through that framework, you're just going to increase the accountability. And because of that, you're going to increase the probability of success.
Awesome. Love that. And especially like the idea of going to outside vendors who are going to do that review and give you that report. So many times we go and meet with a marketing agency and they give us a plan of action, but they skip that report step. They skip that step of, here's what you have and here's what you need. Even if they don't offer or deliver some of the things that you need. And that's the biggest challenge, I think, for our law firm owners listening to this, is when you go out into the marketplace to really find people who are going to give you that comprehensive review, and not just something skewed towards, here's my stuff, go buy it from me. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if there are independent consultants that do this, that don't have a service to offer behind it. There might be value in hiring one of them to do that for you as well. I have no idea if it exists. Once you have those reports, they're going to be enlightening. They're going to tell you things you haven't realized or known, because who starts their business and is a confident professional marketer, right? Like most of our listeners started their business as a confident professional attorney. And you're trying to step in and wear the marketing hat, and you're trying to educate yourself as best as you can, but you're not going to get the same level of understanding that somebody who's doing this day in, day out has by listening to a couple of podcasts and then calling yourself a guru, right? So we really lean on the industry to give you that feedback and that input. Tanner, what I like to do when we wrap up an episode is I like to ask you to do two things with our audience. The first is, can you leave them with one last parting piece of wisdom or information, and the second is, how can they get in touch with you, take next step with you, if there's a way for them to do that? What is that next step?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a parting piece of wisdom, in relation to what we're talking about here. You mentioned something earlier about really the challenge of a lawyer looking at opportunities in marketing and wanting to get there, but just telling themselves that they're not there yet, that they need to wait for whatever reason. I see that as a mindset limitation, and it's all too common. Most of the time, lawyers, they didn't go to law school to build a business. They went to law school to practice law. And so they're a lawyer first and a business owner second in their minds. But the limitation there is that if your mindset sees yourself as that and not a business owner first and foremost, you are limiting your ability to serve your staff, your future attorneys, your clientele, and your future clients, because you're not positioning your law firm at maximum level. And so, this is certainly not a mindset shift speech here, but I see it all too often in consulting law firms where they really have big, ambitious goals. It's the challenge is taking those steps, and sometimes those steps are not huge, enormous steps. Sometimes it's as simple as taking action on those assessments, like we referenced. And I think that may be a good segue. And, Consultwebs would most certainly be happy to offer a free assessment. We do typically charge for those assessments, but if you reference the Profit with Law podcast, we will waive that assessment, and we'll look through and do a comprehensive review. Whether or not you want us to provide a proposal on services, no problem. The biggest thing is you getting an inventory check on what you have, and go solicit it from others as well. That's going to allow you to have much more clear direction and vision. And with that, I challenge you, take action, take a step forward, and really pursue those metrics with the accountability layered in. And the best way to do, or at least reach out to us, would be to go to consultwebs.com. And you can certainly reach out to us there through our website by calling or filling out a contact form.
Awesome. Tanner, thank you very much. Really appreciate that, and appreciate the kind offer for our listeners to get that from you. I actually have some clients that I can think of right off the bat that would benefit from it, so I'll be sending them your way. Folks, this was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. We're gonna link up everything we referenced, URLs and all that in the show notes for you. You can access that at profitwithlaw.com. We mentioned our YouTube channel. go check it out at profitwithlaw.com/YouTube. We'd love it if you became a subscriber of the show. Hit subscribe in your podcast player so you get notified every time we release a new episode. We've got a new episode that comes out every single week, every Thursday morning. You can wake up bright and early and find the latest, greatest interview there right in your podcast player. We'd love to have you subscribed to our show. And of course, Tanner and his LAWsome podcast, go check it out. Listen to his show as well. And can't wait to catch you again next week. Tanner, really appreciate your time and expertise here on the show, and we'll hopefully have additional opportunities to bring you back and continue the conversation.
I look forward to that. Thanks again.
All right, take care, everybody.